Welcome to the first episode of the Pain Academy podcast. I'm Vinny Crispino, founder of Pain Academy, and I figured the best way to kick this off is by first starting with my story. To start, I was an 8-time All-American Division I collegiate swimmer chasing Olympic gold when I caught the wrong wave surfing. I wiped out, and the wave smashed me into a rock. My lower back took the full force of that impact, which resulted in a broken vertebrae, herniated discs, and a twisted spine. I went from peak performance to barely moving. And for over 5 years, pain owned me even long after my body healed. Why? Because if you are listening, you already know this. It's not just the injury, it's what happens after. In this first episode, I'm diving into how pain takes a hold, body and brain, and how I crawled my way out of that pain cave. If you're stuck in pain, if you're tired of wanting to just feel less bad and want to feel good again, this episode is for you. So let's get into it. I have always loved the water. Growing up, it was my sanctuary where the world just made sense to me. I wasn't the biggest or the strongest kid. I was 130 pounds soaking wet as a senior in high school. I couldn't run, couldn't throw a football, let alone catch one. I couldn't hit a baseball if my life depended on it, nor could I make a basket. Shooting hoops with the boys was my personal nightmare. But in a pool, I was untouchable. 8 All-American titles, 33 Colorado state records, more blue ribbons and trophies than my parents knew what to do with, sprinting past guys twice my size. I didn't really love swimming. Waking up early and wearing Speedos, it really wasn't my thing. But what I loved the most was feeling in control of my body, feeling capable in a way that I just never did on land. Jumping into the water, it felt like I was jumping into a different body. My confidence swelled, which as a young man felt like a super drug. The power I felt in the water pulled me into looking at as many water sports as possible, and surfing was by far the coolest one that I found. It had everything. It had the cool board shorts, it had the laid-back lifestyle, being one with the water. It was the perfect fit for a guy like me. Surfing was my freedom. The waves, the rush, it was water in its wildest form, and I was hooked from my first wave. I couldn't get enough. The only problem was there weren't many waves out in Colorado where I grew up. The summer I turned 19, after swimming a full year at a Division I college at the University of Wyoming, I couldn't take not being closer to the water any longer. So I sold everything that I owned, which, let's be real, at 19 years old, it's not much, and I headed to Ventura County in Southern California. I had originally heard of this place when a Beach Boys song came on the radio one frigid morning in Wyoming, leaving practice. And I remember these guys singing about beaches and weather and waves and sun, all the while my hair was literally turning to an icicle, and I wanted out of Wyoming immediately. So, moved out to California, and for the first few months of living a new life in sunny SoCal, I spent every morning surfing as the sun came up. I was hooked. Chasing waves instead of medals was now what my life looked like. The bigger the waves, the greater the thrill. I was addicted to the dopamine release every time I felt a wave pick me up. That, paired with the endurance of an elite swimmer, I was catching waves like a madman and searching up and down the coast for the biggest ones. My routine was pretty simple. I would wake up every morning, checking to see the surf report to see where within 100 miles there were the biggest waves that day, and then off I went. 4 to 6 foot waves were exciting at first because I wasn't a good surfer. And sometimes I would see 7 to 8 foot waves, and the adrenaline rush was nothing short of intoxicating. Despite me being very confident in the water, 7 to 8 foot waves were a significant challenge for me to paddle out into. It felt like I was just wrestling with the ocean, and I loved every second of it. But then, one morning, the surf report showed 13 to 15 foot waves in Malibu. Quick math, twice as big as I was used to. I flew out the door. I don't think I had ever seen waves that big, and I was so in. I remember pulling up to the beach that morning, seeing this massive swell. We're talking double overhead, which for someone like me, it looked like a playground. The break that day was also very shallow. It was rocky and jagged, a spot for the bold, but not for the hesitant. And so I didn't care. Water was my turf. And I, as a young man, refused to acknowledge the fear of paddling out. And I hadn't really felt scared of the water before, so my fear was disguised as challenge. Not only had I never surfed this big of waves before, but there were rocks right in the path of each of the waves. And again, no fear as a young man here. I thought I was invincible, so I figured I would just duck dive, swim, or worst case scenario, just bail out and jump off of my board completely before I ran into one of the rocks. Instead of paddling straight out into that maelstrom, I paddled around it to make it a little bit easier. Finally, after struggling with the ocean like I never had before, I made my way out and I was ready. And then came that first wave. It was the first wave that I went for. There was no warm-up, just adrenaline. It was go big or go home. And I saw this wave building, dark and heavy, not like the small ones where sunlight would dance and pierce through the kelp. This one was different. I immediately turned my board and paddled like hell with my heart pounding. That moment when the wave catches you, it is like magic. It's like flying with the ocean's power. But this wave didn't catch me like any wave I had been through or experienced before. It grabbed me and it swallowed me whole. I went to stand, lost my balance immediately, and because it was faster and bigger than anything I'd ever experienced before, I just immediately panicked and I bailed. I wiped out and I fell head first towards the rocks. My instinct kicked in and I tucked. I somersaulted to shield my head, and then, unforgiving, my lower back slammed into a rock. I felt a pop, a sharp, deep sensation like something just snapped inside of me. And I remember there, I stopped just dead, stuck. And the world, for me at that moment, just went quiet under the roar of the ocean. Before I surfaced to grasp for air, I already knew it was bad. My left leg was numb, it was cold, it was lifeless, like it had been ripped off. When I first gasped for air and I looked down, the first thing I did was I looked down and to see if it was still there because I couldn't feel it. And that's when panic hit. Was I paralyzed? Was I bleeding out? And I didn't really have a lot of time to process because the next wave was already coming in. And so I ducked, barely, flailing with one leg gone. My leash snapped, my board lost. But thousands of hours in the pool took over. And I did what I knew how to do. I flipped over onto my back, kind of like a sea otter does, with my hands pawing and clawing at the water. And then I would flip over, doggy paddling to shore. And I was all alone. No one was there. There were no surfers. There were no lifeguards. There was no help. It was just me crawling onto an empty beach with shock beginning to just swallow me whole. I wasn't thinking straight, and of course I should have called for an ambulance, but I didn't. I felt like I just needed to get home, period. I crawled to my car and drove 40 minutes home. Every bump felt like a knife. Every breath was met with this wince. And it was the first time I ever drove with the radio off completely in silence. Nausea was rising, and eventually, 40 minutes later, I made it home. I crawled up my stairs and collapsed. That night on the floor was the worst sleep of my life. Morning came, and I hauled myself to the ER, broken beyond what they could see. The aftermath of my injury was a nightmare. It was a broken T12 vertebra with multiple herniations, and from the blunt force trauma of the impact and subsequent nerve damage, my spine shifted 21 degrees to the side. My left leg was there, but it was numb. Though I could start to move it and I was starting to get some sensation back, I felt doomed. Doctors immediately put a brace on me to stabilize my spine. Recommendations of a fusion were thrown out, but I didn't listen, again, being a young, bullheaded guy. The idea of metal being in my back, limiting my movement for the rest of my life, was more terrifying than my current reality of having a broken back. So, in a scared, panicked state of mind, I opted out of surgery. And once my vitals were stable, I went home with a few prescriptions to help with the pain and recommendations of specialists and physical therapists. Everything I did from that moment on hurt. Brushing my teeth, showering, surviving replaced having fun in my 20s. And years passed, and I was still wrestling with putting on socks and pants and shoes. Sweats and sandals became my entire look. I got really good at skipping meals. Cooking was not worth the pain. So here's a story of one of the worst things that I ever felt in this period, of how bad it can really get when you're in chronic pain like this. It had been 2 years since my major back injury, which by then, by all medical standards, I was supposed to have healed by then. Instead, I was just worse. Excruciating pain, random flare-ups that made me hobble like an old man. Every step felt like a reminder of something that was wrong and getting more wrong by the day. Holding a job was nearly impossible. I was broke, behind on everything, physically limited, and emotionally fried. I stopped cooking meals, real meals, and just lived off of Hot Pockets and Top Ramen and granola bars. Not because I wanted to, even though that stuff did taste pretty good in college, but because the idea of cooking something, then standing long enough to clean up after, felt impossible. I mostly stayed in my room. I knew I was unpleasant to be around. I was snappy, sullen, and short-tempered. I didn't want to bring that into the shared space with my roommates, so I self-isolated. I ate alone and I lived alone. And even though while technically surrounded by people, I felt alone. And one night in the middle of that, I'll never forget it, I bought myself a $35 steak. Not as a reward. There was nothing to celebrate. It was more like a moment of defiance, some small act of rebellion against how miserable I felt. I certainly couldn't afford a $35 steak, but I was desperate to feel something good, just for one meal, just for one night. And so I endured cooking it. The heat, the prep, the standing, my back was screaming the entire time. It felt like suffering for a glimpse of joy. And when that was all finally done, I took that steak to my room. I leaned against the wall to close the door behind me, and holding the plate in one hand, propping myself up against the door as I turned around, that's when it happened. The plate just barely tipped forward. The steak slid off and hit the floor. And when I looked at that steak, I felt like something completely broke inside of me, but I couldn't even muster up the energy to cry. That would hurt too much. And so I left it there, not for a minute, not for an hour, but for 5 full days. Because here's what pain does. It takes your energy and then it takes your standards. Cleaning it up felt like a mountain. I was already surviving on fumes. And so it sat there, slowly rotting, filling up my room with this low, sour smell like failure that you just couldn't ignore anymore. And that steak became a metaphor for everything that I couldn't bring myself to fix. And I remember just looking at it and thinking, that's me. That steak is me. Left out too long, past my prime. Something that was supposed to be good, gone bad. Everything that I tried to enjoy seemed to end up just like that steak. Dropped, spoiled, and ruined. And it wasn't just the steak. It was the dishes piling up in the sink and the laundry that I stopped folding, the text that I never returned. It was my bank account getting overdrafted because I didn't have the energy to look. My body was falling apart, but so was everything else. My health, my career, my future, my friendships, And the longer I stayed in pain, the more I offloaded the hard stuff until even the small stuff became hard. And it was only when this rancid smell became too much, when I was sure it was bothering my roommates and my sense of embarrassment, I was able to overcome my sense of resignation, did I finally force myself to clean it up. That is what chronic pain does. It keeps you in maintenance mode. You're not moving forward. You're not even standing still. You're decaying in place. And still, this wasn't my turning point. I wish I could say it was. I wish I could say that dropping the steak changed me, that after I cleaned it up, looked in the mirror, and started healing, but rock bottom doesn't work that way. It would be another 3 more years and many more similar experiences before I found the help that I actually needed. 3 more years of pain and collapse. 3 more years of sitting in the stink of everything that fell apart while I waited for something, anything to shift. And, as few years passed and some days were good here and there, I was finding my way through life, tired of pushing people away and shutting the world out. Just tired of being alone, I ended up meeting somebody. And I was in such a low place that it was just nice to have company and not be alone. But I knew that it wasn't going to last long, but I did what a lot of us do. I went through the motions. Despite my physical health being a mess and my life, there were bigger things to focus on. The only thing that I really had at this point in my life was my family, and they were many states away. I remember trying to do my rehab exercises one day, and my phone rings, and I answer, and my mom, as direct as she knows how to be, she breaks the news. My father had a mental break and tried taking his own life. This man that he was my hero. He was the closest and most meaningful person in my life. He was my safety net. He was my guy, left me in my greatest time of need. He was fighting a battle of addiction and gambling that he never let me in on. And it was easier for him to end his life than to let his family in. So I was living with a broken back and now a completely broken heart. My idea of what family was, what little safety I had, felt like it came crashing down like a house of cards. And life, as it is for many people, was hard. And it was about to get a lot harder. A few weeks after my father's crisis, that girl that I met 2 months earlier, she texts me and says, "We need to talk." And you probably know where this is going, don't you? I said, yeah, we definitely do need to talk. I felt like such a mess. I couldn't be in a relationship and I wasn't really feeling it. I needed to end it. It was the right thing to do. So we met up and she asks, "What do you want to talk about?" And I said, no, please, you go first. She says exactly what you're thinking. I'm pregnant. And oh my God, I'm 23 years old. I have $11 in my checking account with $0 in my savings account. I can barely work. My immediate family's in pieces. My father gambled away his future and all of our financial stability. My mom had to sell the house and start all over. And now I'm going to be a father. Oddly enough, I was calm and collected. I am no stranger to chaos at this point, and I guess I just had this let's bring it on kind of an energy. There was so much loss and darkness and death around me, things coming to an end, that this news of a child on its way, it was like this full circle moment of there being life again. And, it's funny because I now see, now at my age, I see 23-year-olds still as children, yet I felt like such a grown man at that moment. Maybe it was my father's time coming to an end, my mom and my sisters turning towards me for support. I felt like the baton of responsibility was handed off to me. And of course, the doctors would say that my son's due date would be on my birthday. And what a gift this kiddo was. But there was still this problem that I had. I could barely take care of myself. How the hell am I going to take care of a child at 23? When he was born, I could hardly even pick him up. Bending forward over his crib and lifting him was my personal hell because of how terrible it felt on my back. He would cry and I would lift him, and his being 9 pounds might as well have felt like it was 400 pounds. My back was screaming and I couldn't hold him for long. I'd set him down and he'd cry again. And one night hovering over his crib, both of us were just in tears and I broke. I couldn't be the father I wanted. I felt incapable, less than a man. Fear flooded me. If this was now, what does 5 years look like? What does it look like 10 years later? Night after night of terrible sleep due to the discomfort mixed with an electrical storm of nerve pain during the day, I cannot tell you how many times I would just disassociate and daydream about plotting my escape and taking my life like my father tried. You know, actions are a lot louder than words, and my father's actions, he showed me just ending your life that was also an option out. And I started to just naturally, after seeing him go through that, I just started to think that of myself. Well, how could I end it? Is it pills? Is it driving off a cliff? Anything to stop the hurt and the shame and the weight of failing my son and feeling like a failure myself. I would just zone out and stare off into the distance, just trying to map it out, convinced that that was my only way out, that pain had me completely cornered for good. As a side note, for those of you out there right now who are mentally, emotionally, and physically suffering, please hold on. I've been in that pit, planning my exit, and I promise you it gets so much better than you can imagine. You are not alone, and you will get through this. I absolutely promise that. I know this is hard to believe when you are stuck, because I couldn't see it either. You're here listening, and that means you've still got a fight in you. I'm going to show you where to aim that fire later, but for now, stick with me through this mess so it all begins to click together for you. I couldn't do to my son what my father did to me. It wasn't an option to put the thing that I love most, my son, through that kind of hell, because I can't play the cards that life handed me. Here was the biggest disconnect. Scans said that I healed, no fractures, no more herniations, no more damage. Relief? No, not even close. Only rage and confusion. I got so good, I pushed everybody away. I felt like a burden. So I stewed alone, gaslit by my own body, healed, they said, but every move still felt like this knife. Trying to live, I would just wince through the stairs. I would grit my teeth to stand up. Athlete or not, that part of me died in the ocean that day. I wasn't Vinny anymore. I was pain. I was weak, needy, trapped in a story that I never would have written in a body that I didn't even recognize anymore. After that wipeout, I was a mess. Crawling upstairs, leaving steaks on the floor, crying over my son's crib. Scan said healed, but my body said liar. I had to know, why was I still hurting? Why wouldn't it stop? And it turns out pain's not just about broken bones or tissue trauma. It's about what happens after. My back mended, my discs healed, and I didn't feel it. And it's the same reason so many of you are stuck too. Pain science is now showing that for nearly 25% of people, the body continues to hurt the same, if not worse, long after the injuries actually heal. If you were in that 25% like I was, you're in the right place. If you're hurting because there is still an active injury, then let's start with the simplest thing to talk about first, the body, the physical side that I wrestled with for years. When that rock smashed my spine, my body didn't just break, it rewrote itself. Muscles clamped down to protect me, compensation took over, posture slumped and altered so I could feel as little as pain as possible, and movement patterns went haywire. I tried to bend. The years of immobility and weakness meant my hips barely moved, and my back took the full hit every time instead, which was biomechanically not intuitive. Why would I be stressing the area that I hurt the most? I was experiencing severe dysfunction and imbalance. My body compensating for years of locked pain and abnormal movements in place. Every step, every reach, my muscles were fighting a war that they didn't know was over. I hit my own breaking point, not being able to care for my son. I had enough. No more pills, no more trying to find experts and being treated like another number in a long line of patients. The Western medical system had failed me, and it took me 5 years to realize that they didn't care about me as much as I needed them to. It was time to take and put things into my own hands. So I put myself back through school. I spent years studying the physical, exercise physiology short course programs at Stanford School of Medicine, National Academy of Sports Medicine, where I got certified first as a personal trainer, then went down the specialty route of being a corrective exercise specialist. I found mentors and coaches learning from the best in corrective movement spaces. No more exam rooms. I tracked down the people who were experts in applying the science. I got certified through Augusta University as a posture alignment specialist. I collected more certs from PTA Global, Kinesiology Institute for Performance Specialty, and various programs from American Council of Exercise, and in my later years, moved on to specialty nervous system training from organizations like Pain Reprocessing Therapy. I was on the hunt for answers. And what I found, it's not just the injury, it's the ripple effect afterwards. My left leg went numb that day that I broke my back. So I favored my right, which altered my pelvic position to absorb uneven load better. I would oddly brace and recruit core muscles in abnormal patterns to attempt and reduce pain. Some muscles worked really hard, others barely worked at all. One single injury became a dozen misfires and issues at every load joint level. I had problems with my ankles, knees, hips, pelvis, shoulders, and neck. Cooking, cleaning, chores, working, anything, it didn't matter. My lower back screamed. But not because it was still broken, but because my body forgot how to move the right way and my brain was still stuck in high alert, pain-producing patterns. My movement patterns became a physical trap that I couldn't muscle or think my way out of, no matter how hard I tried. But there's more, way more. Childhood trauma, abuse, emotional sabotage. If we're being honest, all of my problems didn't start when I broke my back. If we're really putting it out all on the table, childhood trauma, abuse, emotional sabotage, being a people pleaser, never setting boundaries, addiction to opioids from my prescriptions, lacking any health and coping mechanisms, this all was regulating my nervous system, which is a deeper story for another episode. My nervous system was the real bastard here. The nervous system, when working correctly, alerts you when there's a threat or danger, like how my nervous system warned me when I smashed that rock and broke my back. It worked like a charm then. It kept me from paddling back out. It forced me to crawl to shore. The problem was it would not shut off. In a healthy nervous system, when there is no longer a threat or danger or injury, the warning signals calm down and you move on. But for me and nearly 25% of people, I spent so much time in pain that I had successfully conditioned and linked movement and pain so strongly in the mind that even gentle movement felt dangerous to me. Said differently, I got really good at being in pain. Every day, I was unknowingly hardwiring these neural pathways, sinking deeper into the pit that I couldn't spot nor claw my way out of. This was my body and brain stuck in a fight that should have ended years ago. 5 years after my original injury, and my back felt worse than it did the day I broke it. Despite the vertebra and discs healing, I was getting worse, and these neural pathways were being strengthened daily. There is a term for this called neuroplasticity. It's a fancy word for your brain's ability to learn. And just like our brain can learn useful, amazing things and skills, it can also learn bad things. You know this all too well if you've picked up bad habits that are hard to break, or if you're in pain long after a normal window of healing. My body healed, my brain didn't care. It was trying to prevent me from hurting my body again. My brain was stuck on high alert, screaming danger when I brushed my teeth, picking up my kid. Hell, just sitting and breathing was enough to set off the alarm bells. One way to better understand this is to think of a motion light sensor that you place above your driveway to ward off people or animals. When working properly, if motion is detected, they turn on. Floodlight turns on. Now think about one with a broken sensor. A gust of wind or a leaf falling could be enough to set it off. It no longer is working properly. Every tiny thing triggers the alarm. That was me. Every movement triggered an intense jolt long after my body healed. My brain rewired itself around that wipeout, and the fuel that kept this fire going were things I never even considered. Emotions like fear, worry, anxiety, depression compounded my irritability and discomfort on top of severe muscle imbalances and limitation. It was no longer my back that was the problem. My brain was the one holding the knife. So I was fighting two wars, a body out of whack and a brain stuck in a pain loop. Does any of that sound familiar? Because that's where chronic pain lives, at that intersection, part physical and part mental. For me, it was a busted spine throwing off my mechanics. Then a nervous system so dialed into hurt, it wouldn't let it go. I refused surgery after my initial break, too young, too bullheaded. Doctors kept saying, "You're fine." I sure as hell didn't feel fine. Tell that to the guy who still couldn't hold his son, and he's only 9 pounds. After years of putting my faith and trust in the medical system, I learned the long, hard, painful, and expensive way that they just didn't care about me. Maybe it was the epiphany that I had going on my 6th year of chronic pain, leaving yet again another pain management specialist whose entire game plan was to just up my drug prescription. Maybe if I got high enough for long enough, my back wouldn't hurt. Was that their brilliant game plan? Everything I've shared with you, this is what led to my obsession with learning how the hell do you come back after a life-changing injury. Learning was the only positive thing that I could pour myself into because everything else hurt like hell and felt out of reach. I dissected movement with a focus on movement impairments like I had. I dug into pain science, tested every fix I could find. I didn't learn about pain from textbooks. I was living it, and my life was hell. My body was my lab, and it took me another 5 years to figure out how to put the pieces together. I learned that the body's a machine, muscles, joints, fascia, and the brain is the driver of that machine. If the machine's dysfunctional and out of balance, pain has a reason to stick. If the driver is stuck on red alert, pain owns you. That's the combo I faced and beat, not with pills or quick fixes, but with knowledge. How to retrain the body to move right and the brain to chill the hell out. From a broken spine, being trapped in pain, to then being capable and completing running one of America's toughest 50-mile ultramarathons, pain-free, climbing over 16,000 feet in that race, I am living proof that you can come back stronger. And this is where it all kicked off for me. A wipeout that smashed my back and threw me into a fight I never saw coming. Today, in this episode, I hope I cracked a door open for you with my story. And now it's your turn. This is what Pain Academy is built on. Real tools to unlock pain, body, brain, and soul. I have helped over 12,000 people climb out of that chronic pain hole. Check the show notes to read their stories and join me if you're ready to take the next steps. This episode is just the start. Next episode, I'll unpack the physical wreckage I and so many of you are dealing with, how imbalance locked me in pain, and most importantly, what you can do to begin breaking free. For now, I'm going to leave you with this. Pain is not your destiny. You will get better, and I'm here to show you exactly how.